Well, welcome. Thank you for joining the editorial board, Mr. Passero.
Thank you for having me.
Um,
I have never been here with so much
So-
technology. I
Yes.
told my wife before I came that, oh, this is no problem. I've been here quite a few times with this group and I feel relaxed, but.
Well, we want you to feel
This is all
relaxed
new.
despite
The wires are all new.
microphones- despite the microphones in front of us. We're joined by members of the news department, but just to clarify, the endorsements decisions are made by myself, Paul Shawnee, the editorial page editor, and publisher Gary Ferrugia. So, but we'll be welcoming questions from and the participation of members of the news staff. It will be strictly an editorial side of the operation decision. So I'm going to ask you a question that kind of gives you a chance to introduce yourself to the editorial board and what you hope to do as mayor, which is basically what skills and character traits do you feel will help you be an effective mayor?
I think that one of the great assets I have is spending 31 years on the streets of New London as a firefighter and getting to know this city intimately, being in people's homes, knowing the streets, talking to people, just before politics, sharing their concerns, and being part of their lives, sometimes at difficult times. And during that time, I continued my education and went to law school, and with a driving desire to practice labor law and represent labor unions and represent working people. And I achieved that goal. And I've had what I consider a very rewarding career, perhaps the envy of a lot of attorneys, in my practice of law, representing labor unions and representing bargaining unit employees. Though the skills I get from that will also mesh with my knowledge of New London, my ability to be a leader, to communicate with people, to build consensus and seek compromise. I think that's something that's been sorely missing in our government since we switched 4 years ago. If you've followed my career on the City Council, you'll notice that I've really endeavored to be a leader of that 7-member body, and at very difficult times have been able to achieve the consensus that I believe is one of my skills, building consensus. As the mayor, I'd like to see the administration of the city and the executive of the city work much closer with the City Council. The system should not be as adversarial as it's been for the last 4 years, and I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's healthy government. I think open government requires the mayor to cooperate with the council. Did you get everything you wanted out of that answer? Or feel free to follow
Well, we'll
up.
talk about that later. I guess if you're not here, whether we get everything. I think you started to touch on this. When they follow, give you more opportunity. I think towards the end of your end of your answer, you started to touch on this. But what do you see as your opponent's major weaknesses, looking back at his term, and how would a Passero administration differ in your approach? And I think you can expand on some of the things you started to talk about with your first answer.
Well, I believe one of the major themes of my campaign is to restore professional management to the city. I've been very disappointed, and I did not foresee, as a proponent of this new form of government, electing a mayor directly. I didn't see that as bringing the political cronyism and favoritism to the government that we've experienced. One thing I'd like to do is restore the professional management the way I saw it under the city manager form of government. And I believe the charter provides for that. The charter expressly provides for the position of chief administrative officer, and it lays out the qualifications for that position. And I don't believe that the current mayor has fulfilled his obligations under the charter in a number of places, but especially with regard to that position. the mayor is given a great deal of latitude for hiring, and he runs the administrative side of the city. But I believe that, and perhaps ours naive, there's an obligation to follow competitive merit hiring processes that we had in the city under the city manager form of government. I'd like to get back to that. I also believe that, and was disappointed in the lack of transfer of information between the executive and the administrative branch of the government and the city council, especially when it comes to finances. It's been frustration for the entire 4 years trying to get information from the finance office in order for the council to fulfill its duty to oversee the budget. The council adopts the budget. The council really sets the majority of its policy within that budget document. Without having accurate financial information, it's very hard to fulfill that obligation. Now, this could be a flaw in the charter, and you know we have a charter review board that's currently working, and they're working very diligently to identify problems in the charter so that they can have research and a document ready for when we appoint a formal charter revision commission under state statutes. The idea is to give the Charter Revision Commission a leg up. Now, one of those flaws that our charter may have is not providing for staff for the city council. And perhaps the city council in the last 4 years needed to recognize that and do it on its own. One of the commitments I believe we all made, and I know this paper was a big supporter of the charter revision, one of the commitments I felt we made was that we would not increase the size of government or the expense of government by transitioning to an elected mayor. That we may have overpromised on that. For the city council to do its job, it's 7 volunteer members from the community. Without a staff, it's very difficult for them. As mayor, I would immediately fill that hole by providing, rather than an adversarial or competitive relationship with the council, by working with them, providing them the opportunity, the information they need, and an opportunity to do their job. With that opportunity, recognizing the lack of resources that they have. But in the long term, I think the charter, and really in the long term, meaning for future administrations, the charter has to provide the council with more tools and more resources to be able to do the functions that it's provided for under the charter.
And again,
would if you brought on this chief administrative officer, would that person be the day-to-day manager of the city departments? And if so, where would you put your primary focus? Is it council relations, or do you have other agenda?
First of all, I will be accountable. I will be absolutely accountable for everything that happens, but I will not interfere in the day-to-day operations of the city the way the current administration has, with the mayor trying to directly manage different departments and interfere in their operation. It's particularly apparent in the police department, or has been particularly apparent in the police department. I will have faith in the professionals that I hire to lead those departments, and I will have faith in the chief administrative officer that's hired. I picture that, and if you review the charter, it's essentially a city manager. And I will allow them to fulfill their job. I will be the leader, I will be the overall supervisor, but I will not micromanage that. I will spend my time promoting the city. I intend to spend a lot more time in Hartford. I intend to spend a lot more time meeting with developers and seeking investment for the city. I intend to spend a lot more time meeting with community groups and associations, trying to unite the community. I saw, when I envisioned the new form of government, I saw a mayor that was able to engage and lead the community, to represent the neighborhoods, as opposed to a city manager who was merely a bureaucrat. So we get the best of both worlds. We get to elect the person who's going to represent it, who's going to be, the head of our government, directly elected. but then he delegates the administrative functions to the city manager, which we call the chief administrative officer under our charter.
What's your vision to try and encourage economic development in the city? We have pretty high vacancy rates in the downtown and Fort Trumbull. Not a lot has happened there. I guess is one prospective project. We could kind of talk about your vision of how New London, achieves this potential we always hear about, but never seem to quite get there.
Yeah, and if you look back to my announcement, I talked about the potential, and I think I share the frustrations of many people of my generation and really all the generations that came after me and before me about New London's great potential, but an inability to really, get moving in that direction. First, I think it's important to get the momentum going that we had going into the change in government. If you remember those heady days in 2010 and 2011, we had a very vibrant Main Street organization. We had a very vibrant neighborhood alliance and different neighborhood groups. Economic development is pulling together all aspects of our community, whether it's from limiting blight, having a sense of, there's public safety and statistics, and there's the perception of public safety. And I think with all the negative news about our police department over the last 4 years, it doesn't help economic development. So all these factors have to come together in order to promote the city and promote the city in a positive light. That's what's missing. And as you know from my platform, I believe in the development corporation model. I believe one of the things that's hurt us over the last 4 years is a mayor who's been at war essentially with our development corporation, which is empowered to develop Fort Trumbull, to bring the MDP to fruition. And they needed encouragement, they needed support, they didn't need to be worked against. Now, I think a lot of the disappointments in moving forward with Fort Trumbull has to do with the economy, the development opportunities in this whole area of the state have been depressed for a number of years and are just starting to turn around. We should be in a better position today to benefit from that turnaround if we had spent the last 4 years building up our development corporation rather than trying to tear it down. The Development Corporation is just a group of community stakeholders, businessmen, professionals who are interested in bringing development to our community, who have the incentive and the skill and the knowledge to do it, to supplement the resources that government can bring to the table. And why the current mayor hasn't taken advantage of that and has just worked against them, reopening the wound of Kilo rather than helping the community heal it, that's been counterproductive for us. We have to improve our image for developers to be attracted to this city, for people to want to make an investment here. Electric boat is an important industry in this area. We need a mayor who's going to understand that and work with electric boat. Another major employer is L&M Hospital. We need a mayor who's going to work with L&M. The small business community. We need a mayor who's going to understand their concerns downtown, not be absent for 3 years. You have to develop relationships along the way, which is one of the things I'm going to work on from day one, so that you have those relationships in place when the crises occur. Bring all these factors together, put everything in one piece, and the city will blossom.
For instance, you mentioned Lawrence Memorial Hospital and seeking a good relationship with them. During the mayor's term, there was a very nasty labor dispute. Your you're a labor attorney, strong union man. If you're faced with a situation like that, where does your loyalties settle? The mayor decided to stand with the union in that dispute. Do you take a neutral position in such disputes? How would you handle kind of a labor management situation with one of your city's major employers if you were mayor?
Well, I'm hoping that I'd be able to rely on my skills to be able to resolve the dispute before it came to that situation. That was, strikes happen, and sometimes the two parties have to exercise that economic warfare card in order to resolve the dispute. Sometimes it's inevitable. I don't have enough information about what happened leading up to the days of that strike. Once the strike occurred, I stood with the employees also, because I'm a labor attorney. A number of my relatives work there, quite frankly, and we're walking that picket line, and my loyalties lie with the workers. As the mayor, if a situation occurs like that, I hope to be able to be working, and I don't know if ours did. I don't have enough information on the negotiations between the parties, or how involved the city was officially trying to avoid that. But I would really rely on my skills as a negotiator and somebody who can try to encourage cooperation and communication, and hope that every opportunity is explored before that type of really a difficult situation happens again in our community. That was one of the low points of the last 4 years, having a strike of that magnitude occur in our city. I'd like to believe that the mayor did everything in his power to avoid it before he had to take sides in the dispute.
You mentioned police in one of your answers, and the image of the police department. The incumbent mayor, points to some of the problems we've seen nationally between police and minority communities, and he suggests we had to some degree some of that in New London before he was elected. The use of, he says, biting dogs, perhaps what he sees as over-aggressive enforcement in among our minority groups and young people. Does he have any point in that regard, or do you just simply reject that narrative that he seems to be pushing in this election?
To a large extent, I reject the narrative. The biting dog issue was vetted before the city council and the community, and the council opted to endorse the canine program that we had in New London and passed an ordinance to that effect. It's another one of the ordinances that the mayor has ignored, which I believe is a disrespect for the process. I mean, we are a land of laws, and they have to be respected, and processes. It's disappointing when you have a public debate on that issue, and the elected body of the community takes a vote after hearing all the parties and rejects the narrative, as you called it. I believe that, and if you look at any law enforcement agency, the use of canines is an accepted practice. Now, if there were problems with the way our canine program was being run, then as the mayor, as the executive, he should have addressed the program, the problems that he identified, and fine-tune or improve the program, but not reject the tool out of hand. We have lost 35 patrol officers in the course of 4 years, and only 2 have been replaced to date. Our department is seriously undermanned and unable to fulfill its role in this community today. It's a situation that has to be turned around almost immediately. but it's something that takes a long time to do. Training a police officer, if you have to start from scratch through the academy and through the field training process, can take the better part of 6 months, if not longer. Perhaps 9 months, actually. I believe that, and I hear rumors that the process is finally getting underway, but if you paid attention, the council has budgeted for and encouraged the hiring of police officers for each of the last 4 years. But no effort has been done, and every excuse has been put forward for why we're not doing that. Mostly monetary, but I believe it's a matter of priorities. We've lost our ability to engage in any form of community policing. I believe if you want to have a police department that is in tune with the community, you have to have the resources to be able to put the officers in the community to communicate. And this is the way we used to do it. If you remember with the community outreach officers, our neighborhood alliance program, we had youth outreach officers that we no longer have, right down to our inability to maintain any kind of law enforcement presence on the waterfront. We've lost a number of programs, the ability to do a lot of things. We're overworking the officers we have left. It's not a healthy situation.
So you don't see it as a fiscal constraint that the city can't substantially increase the department? Do you feel the resources are there to make a fair number of hirings? And two, you know, how the heck do you rebuild the image of the city enough that policemen want to come here? Because, you know, it'd be great if you get trained officers and then you don't have to go through the expense of, you know, training them by New London. So, you know, how do you've identified the problem. There's a real shortage of manpower. How does the Passero administration fix that?
Number one, I will support the police chief and her mission. I will work closely with her or her successor. It did not help the situation to unjustly send the police chief home and pay her for over 10 months. It doesn't help, and I will not rail against our rank and file members of the department and vilify them. I will respect the labor arbitration process. The current situation, at least one of the officers who was unjustly terminated within the last 4 years, the mayor was soundly criticized in the arbitration award reinstating this officer. And our mayor still rejects that. That's the finding of an impartial arbitration panel, reviewing all the facts, listening to the evidence, giving both sides the opportunity to present a full case, and writing a well-reasoned decision. It has to be respected. All those things add up. The police department in the city of New London is what should be built to what the community wants. We need a mayor that's gauging the community's desire for what they want out of their police department, and then working with the police department, not to undermine them, but to help them deliver the mission that the community wants.
But if you're going to support the chief, and we're hearing that a number of officers have left because they can't work with the chief, how are you going to resolve that?
I view that as a problem that's been created by the mayor's intermeddling within the department. So I believe that the mayor's support of the current chief or her successor will resolve that problem. It's a chain of command issue.
So you wouldn't see a role as the mayor to try to get in the middle of that and try to smooth relations with labor? That wouldn't be a point where you would try to find some consensus, because clearly that the relationship hasn't been good between the union and the chief.
Right. Well, that's a different question. I understand that as a different question than Annie's question. Yes, absolutely. I have been throughout my career, and it was the way I was trained. I believe in trying win-win bargaining, win-win negotiations, trying to identify the interests of both parties. If you're going to negotiate for your client, I have a clear understanding of the interest that my client wants to achieve. In order to achieve that, I really have to develop a clear understanding of the other side's interests. And then you have to sit down and you have to see where those interests can meld. And quite often, you can find the common ground there. In negotiations, if you're going out for just absolute war of attrition to just win your issues and prevent the other side from gaining any of their, gaining ground on anything that they want, it doesn't work even if you win. It would be a Pyrrhic victory. I could give you examples recently in this area of where that happened, but I can tell you that win-win strategies in negotiation definitely is a way to go.
I have a question that changes the topic a little bit. Race relations are a troubling issue in so many American cities right now. Do you think New London has a problem? And how would you foster a community that isn't split by racial issues?
I believe there's been, I do not. To be quite frank with you, I do not. But I am from the privileged white class. However, I was brought up basically a member of the working class. My son went to New London High. I did not perceive any issues there. I've always viewed New London as living in a very blessed place as far as race relations go. Saying that though, I try to keep a very open mind, knowing that there can be other perspectives in this community. And where there's disadvantages based on race, I may not perceive them. So I have to be aware of that. The important thing we have to focus on nowadays is those unconscious biases that we hear about, the structural racism that's still built into our system. Is that going to affect me? Probably not. But to the extent that it's affecting communities within New London, then it does affect me. And I've had discussions with different faith communities, the leaders of different faith communities in New London during this campaign. And I see myself as, once again, trying to build those relationships ahead of time so they exist when there's a problem. I foresee myself having meetings. We have so many faith communities in this city, and they're a great strength to our community. And that's where I see the strength in our diversity. So I see myself as forming alliances with those communities and meeting with them on a regular basis so that we stay in touch and we build those relationships that we may need when there's a problem. And that will make me aware and make all of us aware of what the different issues we're facing in the different communities within our city.
Another theme of your opponent's campaign is that the council and the last city manager produced budgets that had built-in deficits, that the buck stops, so to speak, as the new mayor comes in. He has to make the tough decisions in holding down spending and proposing tax increases, and that guilt by association, since you were a council member prior to him taking office, he warned sort of the bad old days coming back. So if you could sort of discuss from your perspective, where truth and lack of truth might break down in that discussion, and and how would you approach the city fiscally so that we did use up the fund balance, so the city does not again see its fund balance sacrifice to hold down taxes.
I believe that the narrative that he's built around that is is not accurate, first of all. I was a freshman counselor on a Republican-led city council when I was first elected. The last budget that we adopted as a council was the budget that the current mayor inherited. It was June 13, 2011, when the finance director at the time gave us a memo telling us that we would finish that year that was going to end in a couple weeks on June 30th, slightly in the black. That's all the information the council had at the time, and that's the information we went into the election with. As it turned out, there was a $2.4 million deficit in that fiscal year. So the current mayor inherited not only, well, he didn't inherit a $2.4 million deficit, that cut the fund balance down by $2.4 million effectively on June 30th, which probably left, and don't tie me to these numbers, but there was still a fairly substantial fund balance left at that point, probably in the $5 million range, $6 million range, which really, the fact that we did have a good fund balance going into the change in government, the change in the form of government, disproves this continuing refrain that the prior form of government, the prior councils consistently overestimated revenues and underestimated expenses. That's just not true, and we couldn't have survived to change the government if that was true. The doctrine of unintended consequences was working overtime during the transition. If you remember, we had a caretaker city manager, and I'm not finding fault with anybody. I just look at what happened and how it happened, and that's why I call it the doctrine of unintended consequences. We ended up with a $2.4 million deficit in the final fiscal year that was overseen by the city manager form of government. And because of that, I think it's safe to assume that we built the FY12 budget built into that a $2.4 million deficit, because we were using all of those obviously false information, false or inaccurate financial information when we were building the next year's budget. We were building it on a budget that the then finance director believed was going to balance. The first obligation that the new mayor had was to get a handle on that situation, not to just let it blow up out of control. So if he inherited a budget that was $2 million or $2.5 million, that had a built-in deficit of $2 to $2.5 million, he needed to get a handle on that. Instead, he went on a wild spending spree, and we're all aware of that. The city council was confronted with separation agreements and lawfully binding contracts that were not authorized, spending that was not budgeted on a number of things, including remodeling City Hall, but mostly on employee costs and employee separation agreements. That was all unauthorized, unbudgeted spending. There were also positions created that were not authorized. And this was a very hectic time. I was the council president. Some of the responsibility lays at my feet. But I also was chagrined at usually being the last person to know, after you folks, of what was going on. So I don't believe that you can blame eventually the FY12 fiscal year, which was the budget that was shared by the city manager and the mayor, the outgoing city manager and then the mayor for the last 7 or 8 months of the year, ended up with a $3.8 million deficit. I don't think you can blame that all on the council that put that budget together.
Question occurred to me, are you potentially too nice a guy to be mayor? Because in your answers you said, I don't want to find fault with anyone. and you say you're going to try to reach consensus, but sometimes as mayor you do have to find fault with someone, and
Well,
sometimes as mayor you can't reach consensus, and you got to make a decision, maybe an unpopular one. What about being the executive that
I can make unpopular decisions, but I will not pass the blame on to somebody else, to a subordinate, if I'm ultimately responsible. I've appointed that subordinate, I've put my faith in that subordinate, and I'll take responsibility for the mistakes that the subordinate makes. I have to do that as mayor. There's been none of that for the last 4 years. There's been very little accountability. And I'm not going to go into all the different incidents of that, unless you ask me. But I don't think there's a need to do that.
Getting back to the downtown development, you see the solution as changing the public safety perception of the city. You didn't mention schools, but I'm sure rebuilding the schools would be part of it. That, to me, I don't disagree with that, but that seems like it would take a long time. Is there anything that could be done quicker to get some of these storefronts having tenants?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. When the New York Yacht Club came to New London Harbor for the first time since the 60s, you all remember that, right? It was an exciting time, and we made the most of it. And we made the most of it with the downtown associations and community groups, but really they snubbed us and they went to the Coast Guard Academy. And that's where the fleet went. They spent some time, there was some flow over to New London, but essentially their cruise that summer, their stopover was the Coast Guard Academy. It still wasn't New London. So I asked the fleet captain, which is the officer, the flag officer of a yacht club that puts together the annual cruise. I asked the fleet captain, what would it take to get the New York Yacht Club to come back to the city of New London and set up that fleet off of downtown? If you all are familiar with the famous painting of the New York Yacht Club fleet off of downtown, recreate that image. They used to come here every year. They had a station here in New London. His answer was quick. It was instantaneous. He said, just a little spit and polish. Our streets are dirty. There's no excuse for it. Our sidewalks need to be replaced downtown. We need to show respect for our own downtown before anybody's going to invest in us. The last cruise ship we had, the folks from Australia, they were really wonderful. I don't know if any of you were downtown, but I was downtown greeting them and talking to them. And a recurring theme was how beautiful our city was, what a cute little city it was. But they had the sense that we weren't taking care of it, that we didn't respect it. There are enormous efforts being done by a lot of stakeholders downtown. The flowers are gorgeous. Everything that can be done by the city center district and the downtown, the other downtown merchants association, they're doing it. I think they're pouring every bit of their heart into it. We have a lot of devoted business people that have never given up on New London, that have strong businesses, quite frankly. But the city does not partner with them. And the current mayor has absolutely ignored them. That doesn't help. So yes, I believe that really just focusing on making our downtown clean, safe, a clean, well-lighted place, if you want to use Hemingway's term, will bring that investment there. And the kernels and the seeds of that investment are there. We have a business, publishing business that just bought and is investing in a building right on the parade. And that's going to be a wonderful rehab of that building. We have other buildings downtown that are being invested in right now. And the opportunities, some of the gorgeous downtown structures that are there now, we have to market them better. We have to get the investment there. There's some building code issues we can focus on almost immediately. So I think it's a matter, and I appreciate your question because it will be a pressing concern of mine to get moving on that front and to try to get something done quickly.
Tim mentioned the schools, and do you see any role for pastoral administration to work with the schools in getting this magnet school program progressing and fulfilled?
An absolutely critical role. And it's the role that I've been fulfilling for 4 years, which is managing the construction project, which is upwards of $150 million, depending on how you add the numbers up. But excluding the soft costs, the high school project alone, which we are just, we have gotten through the hiring of the architect. We are currently in the process of hiring the construction manager. Managing that, and also solving our school building maintenance issues. This is a systemic problem we have. We're building gorgeous schools, and we fall behind on maintaining them from day one. The solution, we're inching our way towards the solution, but we need a mayor that's more conscious of the process and the problem and getting to work at it. We're not focusing on, and we're not budgeting enough money for maintaining the buildings that we're building. In a way, it's not fair to sell the community on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment in building without planning for how you're going to afford to maintain those buildings once you build them. I am very, very aware of that problem, having sat on the School Building and Maintenance Committee for 4 years, wrestled with the issues of trying to maintain these buildings without adequate funding, and I pledged to solve that problem. And that's not insignificant, and that is a risky pledge. But we have to do it. We cannot go and build a $100 million high school without solving the problem of how we're going to maintain that, without admitting to ourselves honestly how many custodians we need to employ to take care of that facility and provide a quality facility for our students. So I have absolute confidence in the school board, our new superintendent, Manny Rivera, to handle the curriculum side. They've already turned our school system around. I mean, the whole area, if you hadn't noticed, has already got jealous eyes on New London for the first time in my lifetime, I think, or at least going back to the 70s. And people are starting to recognize that New London's going to be the hub of educational excellence in southeastern Connecticut. Well, the city's got to have to live up to its obligation to maintain these facilities. We can't sell our magnet school program if, when the parents and the families and the students come to view the facilities to make their selection, because we're now in a competitive world of education, if the grass isn't cut, if the buildings aren't clean. We're building beautiful buildings. We've got to make sure we have a system in place to take care of them. This is something that I feel like I'm really qualified to get off the ground and make sure it happens.
So a question. On maintaining the city, arguably sections do look shabby, grass growing deeper, not cleaning up as people might like. The mayor keeps going back to the budget constraints, and then we've seen a lot of problems in the public works departments. A very tough couple of years with personnel being dismissed, a horrible tragedy there. How do you see public works and rebuilding that department and achieving some of the goals of better maintaining the city that you will make a priority?
I will hire a professional supervisor, department head for public works. The problem of a lack of professional management in the city has, besides the police department, public works has been the greatest disappointment. And it's not for lack of having great employees in that department. And we still have a lot of them left, though there's been a real war on our employees. Currently, there's 3 of them that are out, terminated, fighting their cases to get their jobs back. And if history's any indication, they will get their job back, because I can't honestly, with all the firings we've had in this city in 4 years, I can't think of one employee that hasn't gotten his job back. almost universally the firings, if not universally, the firings have been found to be unjust. The problem is not the employees. The problem is the management. The problem is the leadership. There is none. There's no qualified leadership in that department. So no matter how much money you throw at it, you're not going to get the value for your dollar, and you're not going to get the job done, and that's what we've seen for 4 years.
Do you make those hirings directly? I know you.
I will not.
So, do you see that as a priority to hire a really good chief administrative officer and then seek his help in the hiring process? Or how do you go about the hiring process that differs from what we've seen in the first mayor's?
Focus again on your civil service, fair civil service hiring processes, merit hiring. That's it. Go back to the way we used to do it. Hire based on qualifications.
So you won't be looking at all to political loyalties or patronage or?
Absolutely not.
Reject that.
I absolutely reject that. I think everybody that knows me knows that I reject that. Not a single position in my administration will be filled based on political cronyism, friendship, any kind of nepotism.
I imagine you see the.
I see that as an absolute disrespect for the city, and it's offensive to me. It's just offensive to me.
I would imagine you see the high insurance costs, the high deductible the city now has, is sort of the
judgment,
the fruit of the same poison tree.
the judgment of this current administration and the way the city's been run for 4 years isn't being made by political rhetoric. The judgment was made by our insurance carriers. When they gave us the renewal a little over a year ago, that first renewal, where they increased the deductible by 1,000%, from $50,000 to $500,000. And they increased the premium by about 100%. That was the judgment on this administration. That was the insurance companies. We're in the Kerma insurance pool, but that was the judgment that this city is mismanaged and not worth the risk, because they essentially were telling us that we were uninsurable.
And you bring it back from the brink. How is it? The hiring, is that the key? The people you put in charge of
Professional management. I believe, and I have reason to believe that you take and you hire professional managers, take the pile of resumes, bring them to your insurance carriers, and that will help lower this risk.
You mentioned the charter commission. Do you see one as likely in the next term of the term of the next mayor? And do you have priorities you'd like to see a charter commission address if one is formed?
I think it's inevitable. Certainly, there are some low-hanging fruit, like the staggered terms for our Board of Ed. I think our Board of Ed needs that. It's universally accepted. I don't think it's going to be controversial. Well, we currently have an antiquated system and very unique in the state where we change our whole Board of Ed every 2 years. That's not the way we're going to be managing our 21st century all magnet school system. So we need to have staggered 4-year terms for our Board of Ed, elected Board of Ed. The referendum process, the budget referendum process, it's a general referendum process for any appropriation ordinance, but it's most generally used at the budget process. And that's broken. That's absolutely broken. It's subject to political manipulation. It has to be changed. I assume that the Charter Review Board will be looking at that.
Should there be should the voters continue to have that power to, right now, you say it doesn't work, it's going to be put off till November when it really sort of isn't relevant, but should they have that power? It could be argued under a mayor system, the buck stops at the mayor, and if you don't like the budgets he passes, you can elect a new mayor, or do you and that's, the current mayor feels that they shouldn't have that right to challenge an ordinance and the budget in particular through petition. What's your feelings on whether or not the citizens should have that authority?
I'm content to leave that. I'm content to leave the citizens with an ability to referendum if they see fit. I think it's only fair. If you will remember that there was a budget. I don't remember which one it was, but there actually was one in the last 4 years that was not referendum, and I think that's the challenge. The challenge is to get the community behind the budget process, and gain community support for that. I think it would be frustrating to take that power away right now. This community has enjoyed it for so long. It'll be interesting to see how that debate plays out during, first of all, the Charter Review Board process, and then when we officially impanel a Charter Revision Commission. It'll be interesting to see how that process plays out. But I would not resist the status quo. However, right now it's broken. I think it's not a good system where the way we select the date for the referendum.
So staggered terms of Board of Ed, fix the budget referendum process. Any other low-hanging fruit or other fruit that you'd like to see?
That budget referendum process is not low-hanging fruit. The Board of Ed, I mean, by that I just mean it's maybe not a good term, but I just meant I don't think that'll be too controversial. The finance director position is perceived by many to be too political. The finance director is subject to the control of the mayor, and I believe that we need to look at a situation where perhaps we have a controller or somebody that has independence. There's a reason that anything to do with finances in a city is, not the finance boards or city councils. We're not allowed to do any of that behind closed doors, and that's a reason. It has to, open government, the checkbook and the budgeting process and where we're at in our budget at any time in the fiscal year, all that information has to be an open book. Government only works if that's the case. We've gotten too much, in the course of the last 4 years, we've got too many excuses for why the information is not available. And I don't want to be too cynical, but sometimes I found myself wondering whether the information is deliberately not available. I don't want to stray off of the charter revision question, but I believe that's right now, that position right now where the city council is in charge of putting the budget together, is in charge of managing the budget, but has no information and no resources to do its function. It either needs a staff or we need a position that's independent of both wings of government, like a controller or something, so that information is always available. And a little bit away from the charter revision question, we have to get our finance office in place so that we know how we're doing on the budget. You can't, we had to build a whole budget for this current fiscal year not knowing how we did on the previous fiscal year. The audit is supposed to be done by December 31st. Ours wasn't done until, I think, May 31st. That's not acceptable. As I sit here today, I still don't know how we closed out or have had no estimation of how we closed out fiscal year FY15, which closed on June 30th. I respect the lack of resources in the finance department, but we have to be able to do a better job. We have to know how we're doing with our money, how we're managing our money on a more real-time basis throughout the year.
Is that going to change with the combined school, city finance position?
The idea is that we'll be able to pool our resources and we'll have some economies of scale. by combining the finance department at the Board of Ed and the city. Hopefully that will do it. That process is really creeping along, and that's not going to help us in this fiscal year. And we really need to that's a more immediate problem, I think, that shouldn't have to wait. The city shouldn't have to wait for that. But if you look at the tortured process of combining the finance departments, I don't think we can sit back and wait for that to solve the problem.
So 2 months after the close of the fiscal year, you don't have numbers as to how the city fared as far as finishing in the black or the red, or how much?
No, we do not. But after 4 years, we still don't have an accurate assessment of where we are in our capital budget or our debt service or those issues either.
Should the council have to approve major appointments by the mayor, or should that be exclusively the right of the mayor?
You know, that's an interesting question. I assume that the charter review process and perhaps the charter review commission, charter revision commission will look at that issue. I haven't formed an opinion on that. I could live with the world either way. I don't see any harm in that. That would be an additional check and balance. We now have 1 term of an elected mayor under our belt, and so we have that luxury to compare and think back. Well, how would life have been if each one of the appointments that were criticized, actually, if they had been vetted through the city council, if we might not have turned out better. So that's interesting, but I'll be honest with you, I haven't spent a lot of time considering that.
Just about at our hour, maybe one more.
Community center, you've been an advocate for many years. Where do we stand with the creation of a community center in New London?
I believe that the groundwork, after 5 years of hard work, the groundwork to get a community center, recreation center established, the ground is laid. We have run into a major impediment in finding a location and finding the 5 acres of land that we need to do it. This is where I differ, where my opponent and I differ greatly. I understand he's promising the community that we should invest in the current Martin Center, rehab it, and that would make an adequate community center. I disagree with that completely. I believe that building, the city will never, ever be able to afford that building, and certainly the amount of investment that it would take to do that properly, and then the maintenance that's involved in maintaining yet another facility like that. If just look at how we fail to maintain the buildings that we have. To believe that we're going to invest $10 or $12 million to do a nice job on, and that's a marvelous building, historic building, but to invest the money and then to have the money to maintain it, I believe that's a failed paradigm or a failed model. I really believe that our community deserves, like so many of the other cities that I travel to regularly in my work, whether it's Middletown or Meriden or Waterbury, they all have YMCAs or Boys and Girls Clubs serving their community. Westerly nearby has a wonderful one. And actually we have a great YMCA organization that now oversees New London. And New London used to have a YMCA. A lot of people my age still remember the YMCA in downtown New London, and that it was a focal point for our youth organizations, our recreation, and really serving the whole community. New London deserves that. We really deserve that. Government is not going to be able to provide that. We need to form a partnership, and that's the theory of the Community Center Collaborative has been working for 5 years to build relationships and to find a partner that will help establish a facility like that in New London to serve our community. It's been one of my dreams, and it's one of the things that motivated me to get involved. And I think we can do it. I really do. But I don't think that the taxpayers can afford to support that type of facility anymore. I just think that model is beyond us. So we deserve to have a pool serving our community, serving our children, and serving the whole community, especially the elderly. We deserve to have a gymnasium, indoor basketball courts that aren't, restricted by the ones that are in the schools and the different concerns that the school campuses have. We need to have an open facility that's open from early in the morning till late at night, serving our community, and we need to have a partner that will help us to be able to afford it. So that's the dream. Where we're at is essentially attempting to get the 5 acres of land, and there's still efforts going on as we speak to find that piece of land, and the collaborative's open to all suggestions to get that done, by the way, if anybody has any ideas. But we are focusing on one location in the city, which is perfect to do it. And we hope to be able to sell the community on this stream and still move forward with it. It's also important, another piece of the economic development pie, another piece of being able to sell our community, another piece of having building a great quality of life here in New London. We have so many great things so many great assets going for us. That piece is missing, but we can get it done.
Well, that brings us to an hour, so we're going to close there. We thank you very much.
Well, I'm not
for
done.
joining us.